Hello, my name is Ralph Sedano, and I am a deaf individual of Mexican-American descent. My parents immigrated from Mexico to California many years ago. They settled in the San Francisco Bay Area of Northern California, where later I was born. At that time, they did not speak English or use sign language. From birth until I was 5 years old, I was hearing and spoke Spanish, just like my family. At the age of 5, I contracted spinal meningitis. That illness resulted in my deafness. Since then, I have been profoundly deaf. My parents wanted to find a good school for me. They enrolled me in a residential program at the California School for the Deaf in Berkeley. At the Berkeley School, I interacted with a diverse group of deaf students who communicated using American Sign Language. I quickly acquired American Sign Language, or ASL, at school. ASL is the language I am using to address you now. The English voice that you hear is being provided by a professional sign language interpreter. I socialized with deaf students who primarily used American Sign Language, which was strongly influenced by the Anglo-American deaf culture. I was encultured more and more into that language and culture, and less with my own family's culture and language. At the Berkeley School, we were being taught to speak, read, and write in English. Meanwhile, at home, although my parents and siblings spoke Spanish with each other, they spoke to me only in English. They were following the language used at school. At school, I experienced an intense culture shock called a susto. This is a Spanish term which may refer to a kind of identity crisis that results from incorporating different languages and cultures simultaneously. The Mexican culture and the Spanish language of my home, American English, deaf Anglo-American culture, and ASL at school. It was deeply traumatic and confusing for me. At school, my life and education progressed year after year. It resulted in the erosion of my dwindling use of Spanish and the associated loss of my Mexican identity. At home, members of my family continued to speak mostly Spanish among themselves and English with me, while back at school they emphasized reading, writing, and spoken English. I used ASL to communicate with my deaf peers. Later, I graduated from that school and eventually became a teacher of the deaf. That was for 20 years, including college programs. For the past 6 years, I have been the director of the Interpreter Training Program at Santa Fe Community College. The purpose of this videotape is to show medical service providers how they can establish rapport, understand, and identify and meet some of the common communication needs of their multilingual deaf Hispanic clients, rather than to delve deeply into the many and various cultural implications of the entire Hispanic community. It is known that deaf people have a variety of different backgrounds and life experiences. Some are congenitally or born deaf and have varying degrees of hearing loss and residual hearing. Educationally, there are individuals who went to mainstream programs in public hearing schools, while others attended residential programs for the deaf, such as myself. These factors greatly affect how an individual ultimately relates to other people. That means for medical service providers, when determining the most appropriate treatment, these factors need to be considered when establishing communication strategies in the selecting of interpreters. This will impact mental health therapeutic treatment plans. Next, you will be shown 3 vignettes relating to the provision of mental health treatment. They are situations that will show a deaf client and a psychologist establishing an interactive session. It will focus on the problems of communication and how to effectively incorporate the use of a deaf interpreter with a hearing interpreter with competencies in American Sign Language, Spanish and English, and how to manage the communication processes in an effort to provide a successful treatment for a multilingual deaf client. The first vignette will show a deaf woman who is having problems at work. Her name is Rosa Maria. She is having significant difficulties communicating at work and with her boss to the extent that she refuses to go to work. Her mother tries to encourage her to go, but Rosa Maria is still apprehensive. Rosa's vocational rehabilitation counselor suggests that Rosa go see a therapist who can provide counseling. Rosa agrees. Since Rosa Maria is Hispanic, this may tend to involve members of her extended family. In this situation, it includes her family, her mother, who speaks only Spanish, and her uncle, who can speak Spanish and English. Rosa Maria herself can speech read some Spanish words, but she predominantly depends upon a pidginized form of ASL and Mexican Sign Language. However, when she becomes very emotional, she will revert to using Mexican Sign Language almost exclusively. So the challenge to the therapist is how to provide the right kind of interpreter services and establish a communication process that will flow smoothly. A strategy called consecutive interpretation may be required. This allows one person at a time to speak or sign a complete thought followed by its interpretation. It is a strategy that requires additional time and patience to provide accurate and effective therapy. Let's watch.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Michelle Johnson. I'm a clinical psychologist, and this is Terry, who's going to be our sign language interpreter today. And we're here because Rosa Maria has a VR counselor's referral. It appears that there's some problem at work, but before we discuss that, can we all introduce ourselves?
Que nos presentemos todos.
My name is Rosa Maria.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Sí, yo soy Lupe, la mamá de Rosa Maria.
She's Lupe, her mom, and I'm Pedro, her uncle.
Again, as I was sharing, we have a referral here from the VR counselor because there's been some concerns at work. So I'm going to ask Rosa Maria, what's been happening at work?
¿Qué está pasando en el trabajo? Le pregunta.
Let me explain to you what's happening at work. I'm here for an interview because I'm young and I think I need to explain to you that there are lesbians and possibly prostitution at work, and I don't like that. I don't want to be associated with that. I don't want to be around that.
No. Mi hija es muy buena hija. Trabaja mucho y últimamente no come, no duerme, no quiere hacer nada, no quiere ir al trabajo, pero nunca me había dicho este problema del trabajo.
Can you interpret for Spanish?
No, I'm sorry.
You can't interpret for Spanish?
What Lupe is saying is that Rosa Maria doesn't want to go to work anymore. She's always been a real good hard worker, but now she seems to be very nervous, and she won't sleep, and she won't eat, but she had never mentioned anything about prostitution or lesbians at work.
Oh.
Okay, well, again, let's see if we can find out from Rosa Maria herself. Rosa Maria, why don't you tell us what's happening at work?
Que le diga qué pasa en el trabajo.
I want to explain to you that there's possibly prostitutes. I'm sorry.
Que hay prostitución, no sé.
No.
A ver qué dice.
Doctor, let me explain to you something just a moment. I'm not getting her some of her signs. I think she may be using a different form of sign language, possibly from Mexico.
Está usando otro tipo de señas, quizás mexicana.
I am an American Sign Language to English interpreter, and I'm not
Ella nada más
clear on her
inglés.
Would you ask Lupe, where did Rosa Maria go to school? Does she know Mexican Sign Language?
Que dónde fue Rosa María a la escuela, que si ella habla la seña en español, que si sabe la seña mexicana.
Pues mi hija nació en México y ya tenemos un año aquí en Estados Unidos viviendo y trabajando, pero sí notaba yo que platicaba con sus amigos con señas allá en México.
She was born and raised in Mexico, and she did communicate with her friends through sign language, but they've been here living and working for 1 year now.
Let me make a recommendation to you, Doctor. Why don't we call a deaf interpreter to come in and assist us with the communication that's happening? The deaf interpreter would be fluent in Mexican Sign Language as well as in ASL, possibly home signs that her and Rosa and Mom may be using, and the two of us will work together as a team to kind of have communication happen. I'm just not...
Because communication is
very
really not
important.
happening. And I'm sorry, Rosa Maria, again, looking at the time, we've got this afternoon, I've got an available time. If we could call the Deaf Service Agency and see if a deaf interpreter could come. Could you all come back at 2 o'clock?
Que si podemos volver a las 2 cuando venga otro intérprete que sí, que se pueda comunicar con ella.
Sí, está bien, no hay problema.
That's fine, no problem.
And we're going to try to see if we can find an interpreter who can help.
Van a buscar un intérprete que le ayude con la seña mexicana.
Está bien.
Okay, I know it's short notice, but...
We can get someone down here.
By 2 o'clock?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right. Well, then I'll see everyone back at 2 o'clock after lunch.
Volvemos a las 2.
And Rosa Maria? It was nice to meet you, and I'll see you at 2 o'clock.
Nos vemos a las 2.
Está bien.
Okay.
Okay. And Doctor, I'd like to request that you and I meet with the interpreter about 1:30 and discuss some of the communication issues that might pop up.
Okay. I'd be free.
You're available at 1:30?
Is 1:45 okay?
1:45 is great.
Okay. All right. I'll see you here in my office at 1:45, and then if the family, if Pedro, if you and Lupe and Rosa Maria can come back at 2 o'clock, we'll start again.
You will notice several communication problems came up.
My name is Rosa Maria.
In many Hispanic families that speak Spanish at home, the communication may be limited to a superficial exchange of information. The parents, brothers, and sisters may use a number of gestures, or they may develop home signs matched with mouthing. Basic Spanish words are used to convey simple ideas, such as como, comer, or to eat. The child who is deaf may not have access to fluent communication within the family or the surrounding world.
Prostitución, no sé.
No.
A ver qué dice.
Doctor, let me explain to you something just a moment. I'm not getting her some of her signs. I think she may be using a different form of sign language, possibly from Mexico.
Está usando otro tipo de
you know the sign
I am an American Sign Language to English interpreter, and I'm not
Ella nada más
clear on her.
During the past several years, there have been laws passed that mandate an access to services for deaf and disabled people, among them interpreter services. Consequently, we are seeing more and more interpreters who have gone through training programs to become certified interpreters. These providers are highly skilled in interpreting between English and American Sign Language. Now, when deaf people from other countries whom we consider to be multilingual and multicultural individuals immigrate to this country, they will bring with them the sign language of their country of origin. Let's say from Puerto Rico, Mexico, Nicaragua, Ecuador, or wherever. Their first language may be the sign language of the home country. Often, interpreters and service providers will assume these deaf people understand American Sign Language. To a certain extent, it is true that people immigrating to this country will code switch in an attempt to assimilate into a new culture and language. But on a rudimentary level, they may only get by using American signs. It may change when a deaf immigrant is in an emotional crisis. They may use their first language. Let's say, if they are native to Mexico and in a depressed situation, they are inclined to begin using that language because that is going to be the language in which they feel most comfortable expressing themselves. The thought of accommodating to the skills of the American Sign Language interpreter may not come to mind. That interpreter is not going to understand their messages. Another interpreter who does understand that language will need to be included. As you noticed in the first vignette, there were several communication problems. You saw the therapist, an American Sign Language interpreter, Rosa Maria, sitting to her right. Next to Rosa Maria was her mother, and then Rosa Maria's uncle, Pedro, who was translating between Spanish and English. When Rosa Maria was signing her answers, that was actually Mexican Sign Language. However, the interpreter did not immediately recognize this and tried to put many of the Mexican signs into an ASL context, and her spoken English translation was grossly inaccurate. That is why Rosa Maria's mother and uncle were perplexed, because they had never heard the information that Rosa Maria was saying. The sign language interpreter was sensitive to realize that she was having difficulties and immediately brought it to the attention of the therapist and made a suggestion on how to achieve the desired communication. She suggested hiring a certified deaf interpreter, CDI, who is skilled in both American Sign Language and Mexican Sign Language. The therapist agreed to this change and arranged for another session.
Hi, Terry.
Hi.
Thanks for coming back.
You bet.
I'm Dr. Michelle Johnson, and I'm the clinical psychologist with Rosa Maria, and you must be our deaf interpreter?
Yes, my name is Martha Gomez, and I'll be the interpreter for, I'll be interpreting between Mexican Sign Language and ASL, and also some home signs or gestures, so it's nice to meet you.
We're really happy that you could come this afternoon, and we know it was on late notice. This morning...
That's all right.
Okay. This morning, Terry was informing me that she was having some difficulty understanding Rosa Maria because she was using Mexican Sign Language. And to be honest, I didn't know there was any difference. I thought all signs were universal.
No, that might have been one of the reasons the interpreter misunderstood. Sign languages are different. In Mexican Sign Language, there are some similarities to ASL, American Sign Language, but they are very different. The meanings are different. For example, there's 3 signs that look quite similar. The sign for lesbian in ASL looks like English and Spanish, Mexican Sign Language. The sign for interview in ASL looks like interpreter in Spanish. And the sign for work in ASL in Spanish looks like explain in English. So there is quite a bit of difference in the meanings, although they look similar.
That certainly could have caused some of our misunderstandings. Again, we're really pleased that you're able to join us as part of our team. Have you worked with Rosa Maria before?
I've never met Rosa before, but if she is using Mexican Sign Language, then I'm sure that we'll be able to communicate clearly. I've never met Rosa before, but I think if we could have a few minutes before the meeting just to kind of talk to each other and make sure that we understand each other clearly.
I think that's a good idea, and I'd like to be present when you do that. So we'll do that part. I'll give you a few minutes during our introductions or our welcoming back the family so that you can tell her who you are and make sure we're communicating. And if at any point either one of you is not understanding or if I'm talking too fast, will you please let me know?
Okay, that'll be fine.
Is there anything else you
I
need
think,
to...
Doctor, I might also want to just recommend that there's going to be 2 interpreters, and it might be a little confusing at times with things that are happening and people talking. So if we could have some kind of turn taking, make sure that everyone has a chance to speak, and I may signal you and let you know when Martha is through with her interpretation, and that way it might go a little more smoothly.
I think that's
communication.
Really important, and we need to let Martha know that Pedro is the brother of Lupe and the uncle of Rosa Maria, and he's been speaking Spanish with Lupe, and for today's session, and because of time this afternoon, I want to make sure that we've established communication with Rosa Maria. At other sessions, we may have Pedro come back, and I would like for him to participate as a family member, and at that time I might be using the services of a Spanish language interpreter. Have either one of you worked with Spanish language interpreters before?
Yes, I have a few times during court proceedings. I've worked with Spanish interpreters, and I have also worked with Spanish interpreters.
Okay, is there anything else we need to plan for?
I think maybe just one more thing. As far as seating arrangements are concerned, if I could be just sitting directly across from Rosa and next to you, Terry can stay where she is, but that might make communication happen a little easier and more effectively, so that Rosa and Martha can be looking at each other directly.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move the chairs, and it's already almost 2 o'clock, and the family should be coming back for lunch. So, again, thank you so much, Martha, for showing up. We really are appreciative of your time, and I'll see you both in the office.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Thanks, Doctor.
For any session, an important key to success is to have a pre-meeting. We just saw a pre-session with the hearing and deaf interpreter team with the therapist so they could discuss the communication issues that would come up in the actual session. This included their roles, the seating and visual placement of the participants, and how turn-taking could be best handled. Remember what I mentioned before about consecutive interpreting. In this situation, this means it will go through the hearing interpreter to the deaf interpreter and then to Rosa Maria, while simultaneously the uncle translates from English to Spanish for the mother, and there the process reverses itself. This will require a lot of patience on everyone's part to achieve the common goal of clear and accurate communication. By addressing the communication issues in a pre-session, the goal will be met to have an effective therapeutic intervention.
Good afternoon. I'm glad everyone could come back. And of course, you know Terry. She's our sign language interpreter. And I'd like to introduce Martha. She's deaf, and she works as a deaf interpreter with Mexican Sign Language. And as you know, we had a lot of confusion this morning, and Martha needs time to talk to Rosa Maria and make sure that they do understand each other. And I'd like to make sure that everyone has a chance to talk, so we're going to take turns and give them a little time. Is that all right?
Está bien. Mira qué bien.
Rosa is saying, oh, she's so happy that there's an interpreter here that understands her. She does use Mexican Sign Language. And thank you for having someone here that can understand her. Thank you.
All right, then we need to really start over, because this morning's communication probably was misunderstood, and I want Rosa to know that we're going to start all over and make sure that we have communication. So would you let her know that we're starting from the beginning?
Porque parece que hubo mala comunicación en la mañana.
Rosa is saying that the reason that she doesn't want to go to work
Que no quiere el trabajo porque
is because her boss is touching her inappropriately. She doesn't know what to do. She doesn't. They only have an English interpreter, an interpreter that knows ASL only, that doesn't know Mexican Sign Language. So she hasn't been able to speak to anyone, and she doesn't want to go to work.
que no puede hablar con nadie ni por eso no quiere trabajar.
Rosa Maria, your mother is very concerned. She says you're not sleeping, you haven't been eating,
Porque no come y no duerme.
and that you have been refusing to go to work.
¿Y por qué no vas a trabajar?
Pregúntale por qué no me dijo a mí.
Lupe wants to know why Rosa Maria never told her about this problem.
¿Por qué no me dijiste a mí? Yo soy tu mamá. A mí.
Rosa is telling Mom that she's sorry that she couldn't talk to her, but they can't communicate anyway. Rosa is very embarrassed, and Mom doesn't understand what she's saying. She doesn't understand, and therefore doesn't even want to tell her anything.
Contigo y que ella sabía que no le ibas a comprender.
Pues no sabía, no nos entendemos bien.
Saying that there is lack of communication.
In this final vignette, we can see how the mother and the daughter were able to finally begin to understand each other at last. Thus, their relationship can improve because they won't have the same communication difficulties just demonstrated. The intention of this vignette is to show that in order for appropriate treatment to occur, you have to coordinate the right type of communication so that you can focus on a successful outcome in the treatment of your clients. Traditionally, the American deaf community has had a variety of resources for gaining access to mental health services. There have been videotapes, publications, and different services provided, of which the deaf community has taken advantage to access these needed services. However, the deaf Hispanic community has not had similar quality access because resources and publications in the deaf community are printed in English. This shows that we need to attend more to appropriate access for the deaf Hispanic community by providing the right kind of interpreting services. That way, communication will be effective. Hopefully, in the future, there will be more publications, literature, information, and videos specific to the deaf Hispanic community. Some additional resources are It is my hope that this videotape will help you to understand how to facilitate successful communication and effective therapy with your deaf Hispanic clients. I would like to express our gratitude to the Dumke Foundation for their generous support to produce this videotape, and to El Paso Community College's National Multicultural Interpreter Project for their technical assistance. I thank you all very much. I thank you all very much y muchas gracias.